Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting for the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for July 31st, 2013. First item on our agenda is the consideration of minutes from our regular meeting of June 26th, and those minutes were included with our agenda materials. Are there any changes to those minutes? If not, they'll stand approved as presented, and we'll move on to new business, where we'll begin with some variance requests. Or a variance request. It's application Z13038 by Mr. Ken Knuckles of Development Management Group for Retail Partners Development and CF Murfreesboro Associates, which is Cousins Properties. He's making the following requests for property located along the south side of Medical Center Parkway in a commercial highway and gateway design overlay district. First of all, regarding 2711 Medical Center Parkway, a 6-foot variance from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that the minimum space between buildings and parking shall be 7 feet on lots of less than 1.5 acres. Second, regarding 2711 Medical Center Parkway, a 3-foot variance from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that the minimum space between buildings and parking shall be 7 feet on lots of less than 1.5 acres. And finally, regarding 2741 Medical Center Parkway, a 10-foot variance from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that the minimum space between parking and adjacent property shall be 15 feet on lots of 1.5 acres or more. All right, Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the board. Our first item today is a variance request with 3 separate components to it, as you just read. The subject property is located on the south side of Medical Center Parkway. It is one of the outparcels of the Avenue Shopping Center. You'll see on the aerial photograph that we have in front of you, it is the vacant parcel adjacent to Chili's on its west side and Jared on its east side. And I say vacant parcel, it's actually a portion of the avenue, the main avenue parcel. Most of the outparcels in the Avenue Shopping Center are leased spaces. In other words, they are still on the avenue main lot of record. This differs from the other outparcels in that, and I use outparcels in quotes, it differs from them in the fact that the developers wish to subdivide this area off so that it can be developed on its own lot of record, as opposed to like Chili's and Jared, which were developed on the overall avenue lot. The developers are looking to build a approximately 9,000 to 10,000 square foot retail building with 3 tenant spaces. One of those tenant spaces is going to be a restaurant use, and the restaurant use is the reason for one of the variance requests. But before I discuss that, I'd like to show you the exhibit. And go over these with you one by one. First of all, here is the site plan, and you can see it's a 3-tenant retail building. The tenant space on the east side will be a restaurant use of 1,805 square feet, and as you can see, it has a drive-through, and the drive-through will queue behind the building, and then the drive-through window will be on the east side of the building. And you'll see that the other 2 retail tenant spaces are just under 4,000 square feet in the middle and on the west side of the building. The first variance request has to do with the area where the drive-through is located. You'll notice that where the applicant has the red 1 on the east side of the building, he denotes that the separation between the drive-through and the drive-through window and the actual drive-through lane, which is a portion of the parking lot, is only 1 foot. And you can see in the other areas up and down the east side of that building, it's separated by about 4.82 feet. So for this side of the building, he is requesting a 6-foot variance from the requirement that in the Gateway Design Overlay District that there is a minimum separation between the building and the parking lot of 7 feet. And this is to facilitate the drive-through component of the restaurant use. And this request is similar to other requests that we've had in the Gateway Design Overlay District. As a matter of fact, on this exhibit that the applicant prepared, you'll see photo 1 and photo 2 are examples of the Culver's drive-through, which the applicant took photographs of to include in his application. A variance was granted for the Culver's several years ago. Variance request number 2 is at the southwest corner of the building. And you'll see on the exhibit denoted there is a 4.7-foot separation in between the corner of that building and the parking lot. And there's a 7-foot separation requirement. Because there were really 2 different reasons for each of these 2 variance requests, and they were in different portions of the building, I thought it best to go ahead and include them as separate components of this request. So he is needing a variance of 3 feet in this area on that southwest corner of the building. And the reason for that is when he initially submitted plans, he was able to meet that 7-foot requirement in this corner, but after having gone to the Planning Commission and after having discussed this with our planning and traffic staffs, that radius was improved at that corner of the building to provide a little bit more maneuverability for vehicles as they negotiated that turn in the parking lot. So that was provided, that reduced distance from the corner of the building to the parking lot was provided in response to comments that he received during initial design review at the Planning Commission. Variance request number 3 deals with the separation from the Chili's parking lot to the newly created property line. You'll recall that I mentioned earlier that this is going to be on its own lot of record, and there is a requirement that on lots of greater than 1.5 acres, which because the Chili's is on its own, or because the Chili's is on the overall avenue parcel, it's greater than 1.5 acres. So because a new property line is being created, there is a requirement that there be a 15-foot separation between the Chili's parking lot and the new property line. So the applicants have partnered on this request with Cousins, who was the developer, or who was the developer and is the owner of the Avenue Shopping Center, on bringing forth that request. So he's requesting a 10-foot variance of that requirement. He is able to meet the 10-foot separation between the parking lot of the new development and that new property line. So there's the variance number 3 only pertains to the separation requirement on the Chili's side of that property line. And in your agenda materials and before you, there is a copy of the site plan as well as a copy of the landscape plan. And one thing that you'll notice along variance number 1, along the drive-through aisle, the applicant has in the areas that are 4 to 5 feet from the separation from the building to the drive-through lane, he is providing a continuous row of dwarf Buford holly shrubs to help soften the appearance of that side of the building. And in addition, for variance number 2, you'll see that he is providing a continuous row of trees and shrubs along that corner of the building, even though there is less than 7 feet in that corner of the building. And along the western property line for variance number 3, the applicant is committing to replacing any dead vegetation that is on the Chili's side of that property line. And in addition, he will be providing landscaping on the side of this property line where the new development will be occurring. The reasons that he has brought this before you, or the reasons why he feels the variance is necessary, is, well, first of all, for variance number one, with regards to the drive-through, this is a very integral component of the development of the restaurant use, and if he was required to comply with that 7-foot separation, it would essentially make the drive-through not functional. Variance number two, as I mentioned before, that's to improve maneuverability around the corner of that building. Variance number three, the applicant explains that this is different from the other outparcels in the Avenue Shopping Center because this is actually being subdivided on its own lot of record. And so with regards to the other outparcels that are not subdivided, this requirement would not even be applicable if this were still remaining on the overall Avenue lot, because there would be no property line where there would be required separation from. In addition, he has mentioned that the eastern side of the lot, there is a no-build line placed on the property by Best Buy in order to maintain visibility from Medical Center Parkway to the Best Buy store. So because of that no-build line, which I believe is about 75 feet wide, he has had to design this outparcel to scoot the buildings to the east side of the lot. So he has had to move parking over to the west side of the lot, or excuse me, the east side of the lot, and move the building to the west side of the lot because of that no-build line imposed by Best Buy. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Each of these three elements will require a separate motion, and I do have some photographs before the public hearing. This is a view of the property from Medical Center Parkway. This is looking east toward Jared. As I mentioned, Jared is on the east and Chili's is on the west. And looking west towards Chili's. And this is the existing Chili's planting yard, in which the applicant is committed to replacing any dead vegetation in this area. Another view of the Chili's planting yard. And looking across the street, or across Medical Center Parkway. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Knuckles is here if you have any questions for him as well.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Mr. Baumley? Matthew, the retail spaces are allowed, it's just a matter of right in Gateway Design Overlay District, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And restaurants are allowed as a matter of right?
That's correct.
There is no specific discussion in the ordinance about drive-through restaurants, is there?
No.
Okay.
No, and I neglected to mention that this has gone to the Planning Commission for initial design review, and the applicant has received approval from the Planning Commission, and he is awaiting action from today's Board of Zoning Appeals meeting before he makes application to the Planning Commission for final design review.
Okay. So there's no indication in the ordinance anywhere that the council felt like drive-through restaurants would be inappropriate, I guess, in the Gateway District?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, Mr. Knuckles, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Knuckles. I'm the Development Manager group, and I'm here today representing Retail Partners Development, who are the developers of the proposed project, as well as Cousins, who's in support of and aware of the requests that we're making today for this project. And I won't try and elaborate too much. Matthew did an exceptional job outlining the variances we're requesting today and the reasons why we're asking for those. The item number one with regard to the drive-through, obviously the functionality of the drive-through, which is an integral part of any restaurant use that has a drive-through as part of their business. The proximity of the drive-through lane to the windows. If anyone's gone through a drive-through, they're aware that the window's right there. It has to be there for proper function. We are required to have plantings along that side of the building, and we do provide plantings in addition to the ones that are on that side of the building. On the opposite side of the drive-through, we also provide additional plantings along that side of the drive-through. So we've got adequate plantings along the drive-through in that area. And the second, back at the southwest corner of the building, as Matthew mentioned, we had initially proposed a smaller radius back there in order to meet the 7-foot requirement. I think it was questionable as to how functional it was, and in talking with staff and working through that, we determined that improving that radius was better, even though it required us to come and ask for a variation on the 7 feet. It made the project better from a maneuverability standpoint. The third request on the Chili side of the property along the east, it's a condition of or a result of us subdividing this property to create separate ownership so that it can be developed independent of what Cousins has developed elsewhere. It's a similar situation that Culver's did. Culver's subdivided their parcel out as well, so they're under separate ownership. But as a result of us subdividing this and creating the parcel lines that we're creating here, it results in, or creates a condition on the Chili side where we have to become compliant with the planting yards that are required along that side. As Matthew mentioned, we provide the 10 feet of separation and plantings on our portion of the parcel. However, the east side on Chili's, we're not able to accommodate that because of where the Chili's parking lot is already located. And while the width of that buffer yard or planting yard is less than the 15 feet, the plantings that are will be contained within that 5 feet meet the requirements or the planting requirements for the GDO. So we're not asking for variation in the amount or types of plants that go along that side of the property. We're simply asking for a reduction in the actual width, which really isn't a seam condition, it's just a width. So we've committed to, as part of this project, to ensure that both the buffer yards on the Chili's and Jared sides are compliant with the GDO. So hopefully that provides a little additional information, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knuckles. Questions for Mr. Knuckles? Do you have tenants for any of these properties yet?
Yes. The 3 tenants are identified. The restaurant tenant will be a Starbucks, and the center tenant is slated to be a mattress firm with Aspen Dental being the third tenant on the west side.
All right. Thank you, sir. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. We've got 3, I guess, components here we need to vote on separately. I guess we'll consider first the component regarding 2711 Medical Center Parkway and the 6-foot variance that's been requested.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the 6-foot variance.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We'll next consider the component 2711 Medical Center Parkway and the 3-foot variance request.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the 3-foot variance request on the corner.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And then finally, we'll consider 2741 Medical Center Parkway and the 10-foot variance request.
I'll make a motion to approve the 10-foot variance.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Knuckles, that application has been approved in its entirety. Yes, sir. All right, we'll next consider special use permit height variance requests. This is application Z13039 by Mr. Dave Smith of Telecad Wireless. He is requesting the following for property located in a general office district at 515 North Walnut Street. First of all, an amendment to a previously approved special use permit allowing the establishment of a telephone facility via the placement of cellular equipment on top of the principal structure. He wishes to amend that special use permit in order to modify the antenna configuration. And secondly, a 44-foot variance from the 35-foot minimum permitted building height as stated in the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance. All right, Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. And first of all, I'll say that this has been about a year in the making. Westbrook Towers, as many of you are familiar with, is a facility owned and operated by the Murfreesboro Housing Authority on the west side of North Walnut Street. They're in the process of undergoing a very large renovation project there right now. And it was discovered about a year ago that their antenna that are on top of the building, their cell phone antenna, were in violation of their 2002 special use permit. And back in 2002, a previous carrier had come to the Board of Zoning Appeals and sought approval to co-locate on top of Westbrook Towers. At that time, it was represented to the Board of Zoning Appeals that the antenna were going to be flush mounted on the side of the existing penthouse. And you can see on this aerial photo, you can see right in the middle of the building that existing penthouse. They were going to be flush mounted on the side of the existing penthouse, and they would not protrude any higher than the top of the existing penthouse. Well, about a year ago, it was brought to our attention that those antennae were actually not compliant with what was represented to the board back in 2002. A number of the antennae were not flush mounted, and a number of them also protruded higher than the top of the penthouse. So during the course of the renovation project, which has been going on for longer than a year, we approached the Housing Authority and the contractor to discuss with them the situation and how those antennae had gotten out of compliance. The Housing Authority has been working very hard on coming up with a solution along with the cellular carriers. In the interim, while they were working on that solution, we have allowed them to place a kind of a temporary antenna structure on top of the building until such time as this issue could get resolved. The carriers have hired Mr. Dave Smith of Telecad to represent them, and Mr. Smith, I think, has come up with a good, creative solution to address both the needs of the housing authority as the landlord and property owner, as well as the carriers who are on top of the structure, which are Clearwire and AT&T. The housing authority was concerned about if the antenna went back on the penthouse, on the side of the penthouse wall, that they may damage the new brick that was going to go on the outside of the penthouse wall. So Mr. Smith was tasked with coming up with a solution that would not negatively affect the new exterior of the penthouse wall. So what he has proposed is a new stealth wall, and that stealth wall would be constructed around the penthouse. And you'll see this is a photo simulation, and it's at quite a distance, so it's really difficult to tell when you're looking at these photo simulations. But I suppose that's a good thing, that it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two. You'll see the existing penthouse in the picture at the upper left-hand corner, and the proposed stealth wall around the penthouse. And you'll see that it's proposed to be constructed to mirror the look of that penthouse. I'll show you a better photograph now of the penthouse. This is a picture of the existing Westbrook Towers, as you can see, it's undergoing quite a large renovation project. And in the center, here you can see that existing penthouse. Just to the right of that penthouse is the temporary antenna that they've been allowed to mount on top of that building during the renovation project. And there is a close-up of the penthouse, the temporary antenna, looking north down Walnut Street, looking south down Walnut, and a view of Westbrook Towers from front. You can see there is the penthouse right there in the middle, and then the existing penthouse as viewed from front, and then looking south down front. I've got some exhibits I'd like to hand out to you. These came in after the filing deadline, so I wasn't able to get it into your agenda packages. These are artist renderings of the proposed stealth wall. And you'll see that the new stealth wall wraps around the existing penthouse. The antenna will actually be mounted on the inside of that stealth wall. The stealth wall, while not constructed of brick, is designed to be aesthetically similar to the brick. It's painted as with a brick design on it. The antenna will be mounted on the inside of that stealth wall. The panels of the stealth wall would be what's called RF friendly, meaning that the signals from the antenna are able to penetrate that wall, but all while the antenna are hidden behind that wall and not allowed to be seen from the ground. Because this is different than the original 2002 approval, they are required to come into the Board of Zoning Appeals and seek an amendment to the special use permit. Now, the new stealth wall will not be compliant, obviously, with the 35-foot maximum building height in the OGR zone. The existing Westbrook Towers building is grandfathered in, so it is legally non-conforming, but anything new that is constructed above 35 feet requires a height variance. And in your plans, you have a tower elevation sheet C2, that shows the top of the stealth wall, which will be even with the top of the penthouse, is roughly 78, 79 feet, requiring a 44-foot height variance from the maximum permitted building height of 35 feet in the OGR zone. So there are two components to this request. There's the special use permit amendment, and there is the height variance. Now, the applicant indicates that the stealth wall will match the existing height of the penthouse and will be designed, as I mentioned, to be very aesthetically similar to the penthouse itself. Staff has discussed the height variance request with the city's airport manager, and Mr. Gerke, the airport manager, has indicated that because it's at the same height as the existing structure, that there are no issues from an aviation standpoint. With that being said, I would just like to commend Mr. Smith and his team, as well as the Housing Authority, for their hard work in coming up with this solution. And with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have. And as I mentioned, each one of these items will need to be taken in a separate motion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? So the penthouse itself is grandfathered in too?
That's correct.
Okay. And this is no higher than the penthouse?
Yes.
It's wider?
It is wider. That's correct.
Okay. All right. Mr. Smith, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, my name is Dave Smith. I work with Telecad Wireless, and just Matthew has very well explained the details of what we're trying to do. Basically, to conform from the original antennas that were non-compliant, we feel that this would be a pleasant solution for not only the building owner but the community in hiding these antennas behind the stealth wall and any future carriers that may come at a later date. As you know, the height variance is only asked because we were trying to match the wall, excuse me, the wall to the existing penthouse height. And from the ground view elevation, it should look just like the, obviously larger in width and length, but just like the penthouse would originally look from the ground elevation. And I've also brought an example panel. It's better to look at something material than on paper that you can see that matches the existing brick located there. And I'll put this in front of there so you can view. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
All right. Thank you.
So a quick question. Do you have the ability to handle more than one carrier in this?
Yes, sir. Currently, it's AT&T and Clearwire, and there will be room, existing room for additional carriers should the building owner, agree to a lease agreement with a future carrier.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, if you could maybe put that up on the table so that the cameras could get it. Oh, just stand it up on the table.
And all those wires we see in the photographs currently that go to the temporary antenna, I assume those will go away.
From the shelter, there will be coax going to the penthouse, but that will be along the rooftop, so that will not be visible from the ground view. And the coax would go behind the stealth wall to the antenna, so they would not be moving.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. And again, we have two components to this application, so we'll first address the request for the special use permit.
I've got one question. Mr. Blomley, do we address how many cellular companies can cohabitate on any particular tower, or for some reason I thought we addressed that issue as part of an application, or am I dreaming that?
It's not typical. In some cases we have, if it was a particularly sensitive view shed, or if the antenna were required to be a certain type of mount. In very few instances, we've required co-locations to come back before the Board of Zoning Appeals, but typically co-locations are allowed to move forward administratively, provided that they're compliant with the original approval.
So if others chose to co-locate or cohabitate, as long as the wiring or the tower itself wasn't any higher than what we've already approved, then they could have an unlimited number of cell users on this tower, correct?
Yeah, as long as the mount was consistent. There was, for example, without going back to the Board of Zoning Appeals,
right,
they couldn't put one on the outside of the wall. But as long as it was consistent with the approval, and typically before we allow them to co-locate, we will require some type of letter from a structural engineer stating that there is enough structural capacity to handle any proposed additions.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That is a good point. obviously we want this all to be stealth from this point forward. I mean, is that something that we need to include in the motion? You don't want them hanging stuff on the outside, I guess, of this wall at some point down the road.
It's technically a part of their application that would be the new mount from here on out, but certainly there's nothing that would prohibit you from making that more explicit as a condition. Just like with the 2002 approval, when we saw that it was that the antenna that were mounted on there were not in compliance, we brought it to their attention that they had to come into compliance. It would be the same way if it was approved as submitted, but perhaps it would be more, in making it more explicit, there would be less room for error on the part of future carriers thinking that it may be okay to do something other than what's been submitted with this application. So that's certainly an option that you have.
I mean, as of right now, we would just approve the fact that they can have this cellular equipment on top of a building and the fact that it can extend up to a certain height. So it doesn't say anything right now about it being stealth, but like you said, it's kind of implicit in the application, but we probably would want to make it explicit in the approval.
That's certainly an option that you have.
Okay. All right. I guess we're ready for a motion then.
I'll make a motion that we approve the special use permit, and using Chairman Rogers' term, make it explicit that any future cell phone users would be inside of this wall and wouldn't be any higher or extend out from the stealth wall.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll now consider the 44-foot variance request.
Make a motion to approve the 44-foot variance.
A second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Smith, that application has been approved. Appreciate it. All right, we'll now consider some special use permit and variance requests by Goodwill and Ms. Jennifer Khalifa. First is application Z13040 for property located in a commercial highway zone at 710 Memorial Boulevard. She is requesting special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center, as well as an 8-foot variance from the ordinance which states that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. As these next four applications are all repeat applications, I will not give you too much detail unless you need it. The first one is at 710 Memorial Boulevard. As you know, temporary mobile recycling centers, approval is only good for 1 year. And so each summer, Ms. Khalifa comes back to the Board of Zoning Appeals and requests an additional year. So in addition to the special use permit, she also has a variance request to the size of the trailer. There is no change from the existing location, and we've had no complaints about this in the last year.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions?
I mentioned I've seen some permanent sites that they've started to use. Will that affect any of these, or are they just in addition to the mobile sites?
From what Ms. Khalifa has told me, it may affect some of the trailers, but she is requesting renewals for all 4 trailer sites that she has. But she may be able to address that. I don't know if any decisions have been made, any final decisions on the future of these trailer sites.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Kind of worrisome, I guess, when you know applicants been back here so many times, you actually know where they sit usually. All right. Anything you'd like to add to the application?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right. You want to address the issue about these permanent centers?
I can. We're not planning on.
Can you come up here?
it might affect is South Church Street, but that's a ways away from now, so.
I'd just like to pay you or your firm a compliment. I go by 2 of these on a regular basis, and it's always, I mean, some people will put things there overnight, which is you have no control over, but as soon as people get there, it gets cleaned up, and the area around it usually remains clean, and I could foresee that not being the case if you were not a good neighbor, but I would say that y'all act in a very neighborly way with respect to these trailers.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing as it concerns this location at 710 Memorial Boulevard. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. Matthew, do we need to take these separately?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit, subject to the conditions set by the staff.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll consider the 8-foot variance request.
Make a motion to approve the 8-foot variance request, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, 710 Memorial Boulevard application has been approved. We'll now consider the application Z13041 for the 1825 Old Fort Parkway location.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is another repeat location. This is at the Lowe's at 1825 Old Fort Parkway. Ms. Khalifa is making the same 2 requests that she made with the previous site. As with the last one, we have not received any complaints about this site, and she is requesting an additional year. The same 2 recommended conditions are included in staff's comments with regards to this location. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Ms. Khalifa, anything you want to add to this one?
No.
At this time, then, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Chairman Rogers, I'll make a motion we approve the special use permit subject to any staff comments.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Next, consider the 8-foot variance request for this location.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the 8-foot variance subject to staff comments.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that application for 1825 Old Fort Parkway has been approved. We'll now consider application Z13042 for the 3060 South Church Street location. Mr. Blum, this one includes, in addition to the special use permit and 8-foot variance request, a 250-foot variance from the ordinance which states that no receptacle shall be located closer than 300 feet from residentially zoned property. Okay, Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is another repeat location. They are not asking to modify the location of the trailer at all. This is one that's been approved for several years now, and included with the other 2 variants or the other 2 requests is the variance that you mentioned to the minimum separation between the receptacle and residentially zoned property. 300 feet is the standard. They are approximately 50 feet from the parcel that houses the Barfield Commons condominium development, which is just to the southwest of the subject property. They have been approved for that variance as well in the past. To my knowledge, we have never received a complaint from the Barfield Commons residents or association. As I agree with Mr. Halliburton, they do a great job of maintaining their sites and keeping them in a clean and sanitary condition. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. The conditions for the special use permit the recommended conditions are the same as the previous 2 applications. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Ms. Khalifa? Nothing on that one? Okay. Then at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? And seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve this request, subject to staff comments.
No second.
All right, motion and a second to approve the special use permit request. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, next consider the 8-foot variance request.
Chairman Rogers, I make a motion we approve the 8-foot variance request subject to any staff comments.
No second.
Okay, motion and 2 seconds. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and then finally, the 250-foot variance request.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the 250 variance, subject to the recommendations set by the staff.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, application for 3060 South Church Street has been approved, and now we'll consider the final application from Goodwill. This is application Z13043 for property located at 1114 Mercury Boulevard, and this, in addition to the 2 standard requests, also includes a request for 175-foot variance from the ordinance, which states that no receptacle should be located closer than 300 feet from residentially zoned property. Mr. Bomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is the 4th year that Ms. Khalifa has made the request for this site. You can see the aerial photograph with the trailer located right above the word site on that aerial photograph. As you mentioned, she is requesting the special use permit request and the 8-foot variance, but also a 175-foot variance from that 300-foot separation from residentially zoned property. And that distance is from the property here on the northwest corner of Mercury and 2nd. So there is a strip of residential zoning that runs along the west side of 2nd Avenue. But again, the trailer is separated from that residential zone by Mercury Boulevard. And to my knowledge, we haven't received no complaints about from any of the residents there on 2nd Avenue about that trailer. If you have any questions before or after the public hearing, I'll be happy to answer them. And the same 2 recommended conditions staff is recommending for the special use permit.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bomley. Any questions for Mr. Bomley? All right, Ms. Khalifa, your last chance. No. All right. Then we'll open the floor, or open the public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would come forward. And seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
I'll make a motion we approve the special use permit subject to any staff comments.
No second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll move on to the 8-foot variance request.
I move that we approve the 8-foot variance with the conditions set by the staff.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and we'll now consider the 175-foot variance request.
Make a motion to approve the 175-foot variance, subject to staff comments.
Second.
All right, motion, and again, 2 seconds. We'll let Ms. Becky figure out who she's going to give credit to that. Credit to. All right, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Khalifa, that application for 1114 Mercury Boulevard has been approved as well. Thank you, and good to see you as always. All right, now we'll consider special use permit requests. First there is application Z13044 by Mr. Mike Cullen. He's requesting a special use permit in order to conduct a home occupation at his residence located at 1207 Azure Way. This property is located in a residential single-family RS-12 zone And the home occupation consists of group instruction for people convicted of driving under the influence or reckless endangerment. All right, Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Subject property is located in the Evergreen Farms subdivision along the south side of Azure Way, which is just to the west of Cason Lane. You can see the aerial photograph on the monitors in front of you. Property is zoned RS12. The applicant is requesting a special use permit for a home-based business in which he would teach classes to people who have been convicted of driving under the influence or reckless endangerment. The applicant has indicated to me that he has been doing this already for about a year and did not know that he needed a special use permit. So when he contacted the planning department, I made him aware that he would need to make application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special use permit if he wished to continue teaching this class at his home. The classes that he teaches are, right now he is teaching one class every 4 weeks. However, he has requested the approval to teach a maximum of one class every 3 weeks. The classes would be held on Saturdays only from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and the class size would consist of between 1 and 9 students. According to the property assessor's website, the house is 2,428 square feet, including the garage, and the applicant proposes to teach the classes entirely from within the existing house. No additions to the house are proposed. More specifically, the classes will be taught in his living room, which is 288 square feet, and meaning that the area devoted to the home occupation will be roughly 12%, which is less than the maximum 25% allowed by our zoning ordinance. Now I'll show you the aerial photograph with dimensions drawn on it. You'll see the driveway is shown on this aerial photograph. It is approximately 16 to 17 feet wide and approximately 45 feet from the back of the curb, approximately 35 feet from his actual property line. So the driveway is large enough for 4 vehicles. Mr. Cullen has 2 vehicles at his residence, leaving room for 2 additional vehicles should parking be needed. However, Mr. Cullen has indicated that most of the people who attend his class do not drive. They have someone drop them off and then at the before class and then pick them up at the end of class. So parking is not the demand for parking during the class will be very limited. The property is bounded on the east and west sides. You can see on the aerial photograph, the east and west sides by single-family residential uses, and to the north are also single-family residential uses. The Cason Lane Church of Christ is directly adjacent to the subject property on its south side. Because of 2 things, the applicant is required to make application to the board for a special use permit. Because there is customer traffic coming to and from his house, and because there is group instruction. Group instruction requires a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals. And accordingly, he has made application to the board for that special use permit. I'll show you some photographs of the subject property. This is the front of the applicant's house. The vehicle on the right, I believe is his vehicle, and the vehicle on the left is a vehicle that he will be selling in the near future, according to what he has told me. A view of the driveway, as you can see, it's can accommodate 4 vehicles. This is the adjacent property to the east, and the adjacent property to the west. And this is looking directly across the street, across Azure Way to the north. Skipton Court is a small cul-de-sac that intersects with Azure Way directly in front of Mr. Cullen's house. If the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following condition. There shall be no more than one class held at the residence every 3 weeks, and each class shall have no more than 9 students in attendance. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding this request, and Mr. Cullen is in the audience as well if you have any questions for him.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. At this time, Mr. Cullen, anything you'd like to add to the application?
No, everything Matthew said, unless you have questions.
I'm curious, you've been doing it for a year. What made you come to the planning department?
Well, the state told me they come and inspect me every year, and for some reason this year the state required me to get approval from the city.
How long have you been doing this?
A total of 5 years or so, not all at my house, but 5 years.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Cullen?
So the reason I was doing it in conference rooms or stuff like that at hotels, but sometimes I may have just one person come in, and then I've got the fee to pay for it, and I don't want to turn anybody away. So sometimes it's just easier and, some more affordable to do them in my home.
I assume these are like court-ordered classes?
Yes, it's part of when a person gets a DUI, he has to go to this class, among other things.
Mr. Cullen, before you actually have a class, so you're saying you don't know how many people are going to be attending?
Yes, I do. When they call me for information, and then I'll call them 2 or 3 days ahead of time before the class starts and see if they're going to show up. So I know exactly how many will be there every 3 or 4 weeks.
How wide is the street that you live on? Is there room for on-street parking?
Yeah, it's a very wide. Azure Way is very wide. It's plenty of parking on the street.
Do vehicles park on the street? It looked like in the photograph.
That was next door. The one that was there was that truck, I think, parked in the street.
Okay.
Yeah, that was next door. But very few end up driving because their license, is taken away for a year.
Do you have any students who have a restricted license or an interlock device placed on their vehicles?
And this is not included in the restricted license. You can't drive here even with that. It's for work. But the interlock is new this year, so I'm not really clear on. I think they still take their license, but after they do all their probation and pay all their fines and go to the school, I think they'll lift the restriction to drive. They'll give them a restricted license after they've completed all the fines and so forth from the court to let them drive to work.
So how often do you have students who bring their own vehicles or a vehicle to your class?
It varies. Sometimes, 1 or 2 every class. Sometimes I don't have any. There's no really set. Some people are from a long time ago. They've been out driving 5 years without a license, and they'll get caught again and have to go back to court. But there's usually 1 or 2 at the most.
No, you've never had more than 2 vehicles in your...
I don't believe so. But 2 will go in the driveway, and then in the future I'm going to sell that truck, and there'll be 3 in the driveway, and then maybe 1 or 2 out on the road, there's plenty of parking on Azure Way on both sides.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Cullen? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Josephine Lemons. I live at 1138 Melvin Drive.
Can you say your last name again for me, please?
Lemons, Josephine Lemons, Lemmons.
Thank you.
I live at 1138 Melvin Drive. I'm a member of the Homeowners Association, which is Gertner Homeowners Association. And I own a home in Evergreen Farms. And I have two ways in, usually St. Andrew and Cason Lane, and I pass by his house. Okay. He has not been a good neighbor. I've been a resident of an owner since 2005. Okay. And I protest this zoning change because this owner, well, if DUI, that means drugs also as well as alcohol, right? So that's another problem. We do not need that in our neighborhood. We do not want any parking. There was a few years ago that there was parking on the sidewalk at this home. The driveway was full and parking in the yard. And so I called the Homeowners Association, so they told me to call the city. But I can't remember whether I called the city or not. I probably did. But anyway, my concern then was that he was renting rooms, or he was having people take rooms at his house. It has, you can see the picture, it has 2 stories to it. So that was my concern back then, that he was, rooming house. So that's another problem I have. And cars parking. Now, Mr. Blomley, yes. I spoke with you a few days ago about the parking, and you said that they wouldn't be driving. But how are they going to get there, and how are they going to leave? Are they going to stay and room at this house? That was another concern of mine, that they would room there, since I'm sure that years back that he did have rumors with all the cars parked there. There's bound to be people living there. So then pressure washing. He's had a pressure washing machine parked in his driveway, a great big huge tank. He's had barrels parked beside the house. His grass or weeds have grown up this tall. Okay. Up until a few weeks ago, this was all happening. And his garage door was never closed. And sometimes he had the tank inside the garage, which I fear that's where it is now. But he has to have the garage door closed now. And then the weeds have been cut, and things kind of cleaned up. And I started wondering what was going on. And then I noticed the zoning sign. So I figured then he wants to start some kind of business, so that's when I called you, and you told me he wanted to hold classes there. So this is my problem with it, that he has not been a good neighbor before. And what makes I think that he will continue, he will be a good neighbor from there on. The association has had him in court. I spoke with Mr. Reggie Tullis. He's either a board member, but he usually takes care of the problems in our community out there. So I spoke with him, and he said that he had Mr. Cullen in court a few times. The Homeowners Association has had him. So anyway, I protest, of letting him have a school there for DUIs, because of the drug. I know some of them are drugs, and we just don't want that in our neighborhood. So I thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Lemons. Anyone else present wishing to speak for or against the application?
Can I comment on what she said?
Yes, sir. Mr. Cullen, hang on one second. Let me make sure there's nobody else that wants to speak. Okay. Mr. Cullen, we'll hear from you last and final.
I've never been in court over that. The association has written me letters to put that trailer either in the back of the yard or in the garage, of which I did, and I forget the guy in the other department, the zoning, but there was a fence. They were complaining about I've got an 8-foot fence around the house to fix that, and the trailer, and there was something leaning up against the side of the house, a headboard that I was throwing away, and all that was taken care of. So there's never been any court thing. I have a landscaper that I pay, Mike Yates, takes care of the yard. And I did about 4 or 5 years ago have roommates. I'm single or divorced, and I did have roommates that parked there years ago, but they've been gone for quite a while. So all this stuff she's saying is, and these people are, and they're in there for DUI, and there are a few people that were convicted of driving on prescription drugs, but there's no hardcore drug people in these classes. They've been pulled over because they were taking some sort of pain pills or something of that nature. So, the landscaping is being paid for, and and all that stuff about the fence and the stuff on the side has been resolved. Once I took care of it, everything was dismissed from the homeowners association.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
At this time, then, we'll declare the public hearing closed, and we'll open the floor for further discussions. Motion.
We discussed parking at these things a bunch of times. I want to make sure, are we allowing parking for this use on the street? Or typically made provisions, hey, if there's somebody coming, then it's got to fit off site.
What the ordinance says is that, and this is one of the standards in the zoning ordinance, there shall be adequate provision for any traffic generated by such home occupation, including off-street parking if required by the BZA. So there's not a prohibition against parking on the street, and I think that it would be, if it was conditioned upon no parking occurring on the street, that would be a relatively difficult one to enforce as far as who may be, what may be a personal vehicle or a visitor versus who may be a student. But at any rate, that's the standard. There shall be adequate provision for any traffic generated by such home occupation, including off-street parking if required by the BZA.
You've been out there. Is this street wide enough to park cars on both sides of the road and then get 2 cars side by side traveling?
Just in eyeballing it, and as that was being discussed, I was trying to recollect in my mind, but just by eyeballing the aerial photograph, we could put that back up on the screen. You can see in front of his next door neighbor's house there is a vehicle parked, and which leaves a great deal of space along Azure Way. It does appear that there is room for vehicles to park on both sides just by eyeballing the aerial photograph, and you can see that the pavement width of Azure Way, and you compare it to the pavement width of Havering Drive and Skipton Drive, is much wider. But I could not tell you for certain how that translates into on-street parking. Perhaps one of my other photographs. That one's zoomed in a little bit more. That's the same photograph, just zoomed in a little bit more. Unfortunately, in my photographs, you can't tell a whole lot. You don't see a shot of the entire roadway.
Are tenants allowed in this zoning? Obviously, you could rent the house, but can you have multi-families?
Our zoning ordinance allows for a maximum of 4 unrelated people to live in a single-family dwelling, and it still be considered a single-family dwelling.
Okay.
I'll make a comment. I know Mr. Cullen, but the way I try to evaluate these in-home businesses that come before the BZA is that, of course, being on this board, I live in a neighborhood in the city of Murfreesboro myself, and would I want this business in my neighborhood? And in my mind and my gut right now, the answer to that question is no, I would not. And so that would, is it impactful to the neighborhood or to what the neighborhood is all about? I'm not sure I myself can answer that. I think as a board we need to evaluate that. But at face, this is not something that I would want in my neighborhood. So, that would lead me to believe where I would not be for it. But that's just my opinion.
Are we aware of any other home occupations in the area that have people coming to and from?
I have not researched that.
And that would give us some, I guess, indication about the character of the neighborhood. Did you see any cars on the street when you were visiting?
I don't. Let's see. Other than that Malibu right there.
Is that broken down?
Got a window sticker on it.
They had to tow that one out of there. That was the same one that's on the satellite picture, isn't it?
I don't recall having seen any out there. Of course, when I was out there, it was the middle of a weekday, so I don't know how good a gauge that would be for whether or not it occurs on a regular basis.
Yeah, we've closed the public hearing, so we got to base it on what we've heard so far. Still trying to gather information, have a discussion here.
I'm having a tough time. If there was any more frequency, I would have had a really tough time with it. I guess since it's no more than 3 weeks, I guess I'd be okay. Of course, if there's issues with the house, how it's been kept, that's makes me a little leery. So I have a tough, as John says, struggle this one a little bit.
I believe my biggest concern is the effect on the traffic conditions in the neighborhood. With 9 students at a time, even if that occurs only at drop-off and pickup, you still may have several minutes of someone parked there waiting for them to pick up the student or drop off the student. And 9 vehicles looking at the pictures, I believe could cause a traffic condition at that location.
I just wish that these type classes could be taught, outside of the home. I think it's a great thing that they have classes for DUI people, but I think they should be, in some facility where it's not a neighborhood. That's the problem I'm having with it.
I'll say, Mr. Cullen, too, that the requirements we have to go by are that include that you have to prove that the use won't have a substantial or undue adverse effect upon adjacent property, the character of the neighborhood, or traffic conditions, or parking. And yeah, I probably agree with the rest of the board members. I'm not sure that that's been proven. I don't know we've heard any evidence that there is any other, it's not exactly commercial use, but it's definitely not residential use that's in the vicinity. What I think we've heard is that this is all a residential neighborhood, and it seems like a use like this would be inconsistent with the residential aspect of the neighborhood as it exists now. And also, you're right there, real close to that main street. Is it Cason Lane? So you're going to be, if you do have parking on the street, possibly a little choke point right there for cars coming on or off of Cason Lane. So that's why I think that I'm going to struggle with this one, as Davis said.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go and make a motion to deny the application.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Mr. Cohn, that application has been denied.
Mr. Chairman, so that we have a good, clear record on this, I would ask to amend that motion to state the particular reasons why it's being denied.
Okay. Well, my reason is that I feel like that, as I said, I think it's great to have DUI classes. I just don't know that it's proper to have it in a neighborhood. This was my reasoning. And I think some of the other reasons were traffic and parking. But I made my motion based on that.
All right. And
Do you need to hear from the rest of the board members?
is there any additional reasons that someone would advance for denying the motion, denying the request?
Well, I mean, the comment that I made, I just feel like, again, would I want this in my neighborhood, and does it change the character of the neighborhood? And I think based upon the class itself and the type of the class, that it changes the character of the neighborhood.
And is the second based on those same reasons?
I think that is I would amend the motion rather than seconding it and stating that to move to deny the motion based on the fact that the application has an undue adverse effect upon the adjacent property or upon the neighborhood character, as well as potentially the traffic conditions upon the neighborhood.
Is that acceptable? A second for the amended motion?
Second.
Okay. I certainly agree with the motion. I think the fact that the plaintiff, or excuse me, not the plaintiff, but the applicant has simply just not proven. I think it's the burden of proof is on the applicant to prove it. So I'm not sure if we have to affirmatively find that there's an undue adverse effect, but as so much as we have to find that there's not proof that there's not that effect. You've gone a step farther even, and I probably agree with you that this use is not consistent with the surrounding neighborhood and is out of character with it. So I think we're well covered there.
Did you call for a vote again?
I will. All right. Any further discussion? Not all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, Mr. Collin, that application has been denied. All right, we'll next consider application Z13045 by Mr. Jeff Hooper, Barge Cawthon and Associates for Rutherford County Board of Education, requesting a special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use, which would be a public school in a residential single-family RS-15 zone. And this is for property located at 3945 Blaze Drive. The applicant is seeking approval to construct a 64,000 square foot building addition as well as other site improvements. All right, Mr. Baum, if you'd review that for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property, as you mentioned, is located at 3945 Blaze Drive, which is along the south side of Blaze Drive, west of Fortress Boulevard. It's developed as the existing Blackman Middle School, and the existing Blackman Middle School was approved by special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals back in 2000 for 170,000 square foot building. In 2003, the BZA approved a special use permit for the development of the school's athletic fields. You have the aerial photograph in front of you. You can see the school facility on the west side of the site and the athletic fields on the east side of the site closer to Fortress Boulevard. The surrounding land uses are predominantly residential and institutional in nature. To the south, there are the Blackman Oaks East, Trafalgar, and Victory Point subdivisions. To the north is the Blackman High School. Further to the east is Blackman Elementary School, and the county E911 building is also to the east of the subject property. The applicant has brought forth this request as the middle school has grown and is in need of additional space, more specifically additional classroom space and additional cafeteria space. The applicant proposes to build a 64,000 square foot addition in the form of a new classroom wing on the east side of the existing building, as well as a new an addition on the east side of the existing cafeteria. And I'll show you a copy of the plan. Here is the proposed building addition and the proposed classroom addition, and the proposed cafeteria addition on the east side of the building, as well as some additional parking improvements. As I mentioned, the classroom addition will be, and the cafeteria addition will total 64,000 square feet. The classroom addition will be a two-story building. You can see the architectural elevation here. It will be brick to match the existing building, and according to the elevations, it will not exceed the maximum 35-foot building height in the RS-15 zone. It will top out at 34 feet in height. So no variances, including height variances, are required for the proposed construction. The site has access to both Blaze Drive and Fortress Boulevard. A total of 88 additional parking spaces are included with the proposed expansion. The new parking areas will be both to the north and south of the proposed classroom wing. The site will continue to exceed minimum parking requirements No new recreational fields are proposed with this special use permit. The proposed improvements are located approximately 200 feet from the residentially zoned property to the south. And I'll go back to the aerial photo. You'll notice that there is a tree line along the southern property line. The building addition will be right in the area where the word site is proposed, or is located on the aerial photo. And the applicants are proposing to leave the mature tree line as is, and a survey has not been performed to determine how many of these trees are on the applicant's property versus how many might be on the adjacent properties to the south. But it does appear by looking at the aerial photograph that at least some of those trees are located on the applicant's property. And the applicant is proposing to use this existing tree line as a natural buffer between the neighborhoods to the south and the middle school site. No additional buffering was required with either the 2000 or 2003 special use permit. And the applicant is committing to not disturbing any of the vegetation along that southern property line. With regards to the other standards for institutional group assembly uses in residential zones, the lot size does meet minimum requirements. The existing solid waste facilities will not be modified as a result of the expansion. There will be new parking lot lighting added as a component of the parking lot construction, but the applicant has submitted a photometric lighting plan demonstrating that the lighting spillover is compliant with minimum requirements. The school does propose the installation of outdoor speakers, but they are to be used only in conjunction with the fire alarm system. If the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following condition. The existing tree line along the southern property line must remain undisturbed. And I'll show you some photographs of the site. This is the front of Blackman Middle, viewed from Blaze Drive. Looking across Blaze Drive at Blackman High School to the north. Looking across Blaze Drive, once again, at the Blackman High School athletic fields. This is the location of the proposed cafeteria addition in this grassy area. Looking west towards the location of the proposed classroom wing. Also looking in the vicinity of the new wing. And this is looking south toward the existing tree line along the southern property line. As you can see, that it is a fairly dense tree line. And in the middle of summer, creates a very opaque screen. This application is being brought before you today because this addition, provisions were not made for this addition when it initially went to the Board of Zoning Appeals back in 2000. Therefore, because of the expansion, a special use permit is required for the expansion. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. And Mr. Hooper, who is the project engineer, is available if you have any questions for him.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Questions for Mr. Conley? All right, Mr. Hooper.
And I really have nothing further to add, but I'm here to answer any questions that the board may have.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Hooper? All right, you're going to get off easy today. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
I did have a question. I'm not sure if it would be better answered by Mr. Blomley or the applicant, whether there had been a traffic study on this property. I think I saw within the application that there was no, they didn't anticipate there would be an increase in traffic, but
There will be an increase in the capacity of the school. With the 25 additional classrooms, I believe it's about an additional 400 students or so that the school will have the capacity for. To my knowledge, no traffic study has been performed in conjunction with this request.
If there's no other comments, I'll make a motion to approve the application subject to staff comments.
And I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Hooper, that application has been approved. Appreciate the county giving us an opportunity to look at that. All right, next we'll consider I don't see an application. I do. Okay. Okay. Request by Mr. Joe Swanson, Jr., Swanson Developments, LP, for Victory Christian Center, Murfreesboro, Inc., and Dr. Michael Hine for Redeemer Classical Academy. They have two issues, one, I guess, contingent on the other. First, they're asking for a waiver by the BZA in accordance with Section 8H of the zoning ordinance, requiring that if an application for a special use permit is denied by the BZA, which there was one last month pertaining to this property, a reapplication pertaining to the same property and requesting the same special use permit may not be filed within 18 months of the date final action was taken on the previous application. Okay, so I guess let's consider that issue first. That issue is probably not one that, first of all, we require any kind of public hearing on, is it?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. I guess for purpose of history, Matthew, you want to go ahead and bring us up to speed on where we've been and where we're going.
Be glad to. We look at the aerial photograph. See the three portables on the property at 1503 Sulphur Springs Road, the former home of Family Worship Center, currently owned by Victory Christian Center. Over the years, staff has been working with Family Worship Center on bringing that property into compliance. Those portables were approved in 1998 on a temporary basis. It was represented that they would be there for 3 years. So they are quite a number of years in violation of their special use permit. When the property changed hands, when Family Worship Center sold it to Victory Christian Center, we notified Victory Christian Center and their agent, Mr. Joe Swanson, Jr., that the portables were in violation of the 1998 special use permit, and that they would require that in order to bring that property into compliance, the portables would have to be removed or an extension to the special use permit be granted. At any rate, fast forward to June last month, Mr. Swanson made application to the board for a 3-year extension of to allow the portables on there for 3 years, an extension to the special use permit from 1998. There was no particular tenant at the time that he made the application, no particular buyer or tenant. Victory Christian Center was marketing the property for sale or lease, and Mr. Swanson wanted any potential buyer or tenant to have the option to start out with those portables. Shortly after that meeting, Mr. Swanson made contact with me, and I forgot to mention an important part. The board denied that request last month. But shortly after the meeting, a day or two after the meeting, Mr. Swanson contacted me and said that he had a potential tenant, but a very important part of their occupying the property would be the use of the 3 portable classrooms that were on the site. So after some review of the ordinance and discussion with our legal department, specifically the portion of the ordinance that states that If an application for a special use permit is denied by the BZA, a reapplication pertaining to the same property and requesting the same special use permit may not be filed within 18 months of the date final action was taken on the previous application unless such reapplication is initiated by the department or authorized by the BZA. And in this case, even though the applicants are looking to use the property as a school as opposed to the previous use as a church, because the use of the portables is so integrally tied to their use of the property, and because that was the subject of last month's special use permit, the use of the portables being substantially the same as what was applied to or applied for last month, this clause in the zoning ordinance applies that they cannot make application for 18 months from the date of denial. However, there is that statement in there that unless the request is initiated by the planning department or authorized by the BZA, and staff, both the legal and the planning staffs, thought it was best to allow the board to make that decision as opposed to it being made on a staff level, wanting the board to have the opportunity to consider whether to hear this again and to waive that 18-month period as opposed to staff doing so. The applicants have submitted some new information for you to consider in determining whether or not to waive the 18-month waiting period. They have submitted a letter requesting the BZA waive the 18-month waiting period with that with the additional information. The letter includes new information which was not available at the time of the June 26th meeting that the applicants would like the board to consider as it decides whether or not to waive the waiting period. In addition, a copy of the lease has been submitted for the board's consideration. If the board decides to grant the request, then the next item considered on the agenda is the special use permit request. So the applicants, it's a joint application, both the request for the waiver and the request for the special use permit. A joint request by the owner of the property, Victory Christian Center, represented by Joe Swanson Jr. of Swanson Development. And here at the meeting, Mr. Bruce Kirk is here representing Mr. Swanson. And Redeemer Classical Academy, represented by Dr. Michael Hine. As both the tenant and the owner, they have made a joint request for this waiver and for the special use permit. Redeemer Classical Academy does have they have signed a lease on the property. They do have a contingent lease so that they are not obligated to follow through with the lease if the board denies either one of these requests. With that being said, I think it would be appropriate for the applicants to come forward and present the information that they would like for you to know in determining whether or not to waive the waiting period.
Okay. So, Matthew, staff and council are convinced that under the ordinance, the BZA has the ability to waive the 18-month requirement.
Yes, it's explicit in the zoning ordinance that is the case.
Okay. Okay. Do the board members need to hear from anybody or consider any more information before we at least take up this limited issue of whether we're going to even rehear it or not?
I feel like in the agenda packets and stuff we provided, there's enough new information from what we had and change of circumstances for the property that I'm okay proceeding and hearing the next portion of it, if that's what you're getting at.
I think the question asked was whether or not we needed more information from them in order to consider whether to waive it. If we're ready to begin discussion on whether to waive it, I have some comments as well.
Okay. Does anybody need to hear from anybody before we begin discussion on this limited issue?
I don't.
Okay. Good. Okay. Julie?
In review of the minutes that we've now approved, it says specifically that Mr. Swanson provided that he received a letter of intent from a company which was not he had not reviewed, which was a lease with an option to purchase. Those programs from this that he received from this letter, it appears in our minutes, would need the portables until they got improvements on the main building, and that it appeared that and from my understanding of that was an integral part of that lease letter of intent. And because of that, I don't believe that this information is new information, and rather that we considered that as a possibility, and that those possible tenants were available, and that was part of our discussion previously last month.
It is a little different, though. Last month, they didn't have a tenant, right? I think since then, they have someone that's interested in renting the
But he did say in that what he stated was that he had received a letter of intent prior to the meeting. He had not reviewed it completely, but he gave us information regarding what that intent was. And we considered the possibility of a lessee that may or may not need these portables, and whether or not it was important for them to have the choice to remove them or be forced to remove them due to us extending this later, or whether or not this should be removed at this time. And looking through these documents, I don't think that this is enough of a change that we should remove this requirement of an 18-month waiting period.
I remember him saying that too, that there was somebody that had expressed some interest. But when I heard that, it struck me as being so speculative that I really did not consider that as being something that was on the horizon even, because he didn't identify who it was or what the proposed use was going to be. And so I'm okay with just hearing it again. I'm not saying what we'll do, but just my opinion. Certainly don't want to speak for the board and other board members, but I would be okay with hearing it again.
I guess I have a question for Mr. Blunt. Have we ever considered waiving this before? Is this something that's come before the board and your understanding of the history of the BZA?
It's my recollection that there was one other instance of a church that was denied, but that significantly changed their plans enough to where I believe that staff had, and this was a number of years ago, right around the time that I started, may have predated me. I can't remember, because it kind of started in a previous, in Mr. DeMassi's tenure, and kind of bled over into my tenure working with the Board of Zoning Appeals. I believe that there was an instance where we waived, as staff, waived the waiting period. That's the only time that I can recollect.
Yeah.
The only comment that I would make also for hearing this new application, or I guess you could call it a new application, is that I would say the case that Mr. Swanson was trying to make to extend the portables, in my view, was based upon the proposed tenant was going to be a church, and he was molding his case with respects to the number of people that were going to be part of that congregation, and the fact that you needed the portables for the reasons based upon the number in the congregation, and then they at some later date would have to add on to the church. In this particular situation, I think that it's a new revelation. It is a totally different use, giving him the opportunity to make his case based upon this use, I think is a fair way to evaluate it.
I agree.
We convinced you?
It requires a motion or a motion?
Yeah, we do need a motion on this particular request to wait for the waiver.
I'll make a motion that we grant the waiver.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, if not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, the request to waive that requirement has been granted, so we'll now consider what is a new application, Matthew, right? It has a
Yes.
new application number, Z13046 by Mr. Joe Swanson of Swanson Developments for Victory Christian Center, Murfreesboro, and Dr. Michael Hine for Redeemer Classical Academy, requesting a special use permit in order to establish an institutional group assembly use, which would be a private school in a residential single-family RS-10 zone. And this is for property located at 1503 Sulphur Springs Road. As a component of their application, the applicants are requesting that the 3 existing portable classroom buildings located on the subject property be allowed to remain on site for an additional 2 years. All right. I guess we'll hear from Mr. Blomley again.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. I know we're all familiar with this location. I'll just tell you a little bit about the applicant's proposed use. As you know, the property is zoned RS-10. A special use permit is required for an institutional group assembly use in an RS-10 zone. This site was developed with an institutional group assembly use, that being a church. And even though a school is also an institutional group assembly use, it's a different type of institutional group assembly use with a different dynamic, different traffic patterns. So it requires a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals, even though it's also in the category of institutional group assembly. The applicants are proposing to use the 3 portable classrooms as their classrooms. Redeemer Classical Academy will be a K-12 school, and the instruction will be done inside of those 3 portable classrooms. They will also use a portion of the principal structure, that being they will hold their chapel inside of the sanctuary in the old church building, and they will also use some space in the upstairs portion of the building for their lunchroom and kitchen, and they will use several rooms on the first floor for their administrative office and records storage. They've indicated that the number of students that they anticipate at the school will be 40 for this coming school year. While this is the applicant's estimate as to the number of students, it should be clear that they would not be prohibited from exceeding that number in the future should their enrollment increase. Normal hours of operation for the school, excluding any functions that happen outside of these hours, would be Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. And even though school would let out earlier than 6, they would have the extended school program as well. The site is surrounded by residential uses. To the east across Sulphur Springs Road are a number of duplexes on Short Place and Corner Court. There are single-family residences both to the north and to the south across Myers Drive, as well as to the west along Grassmere Court and Garden Court. The applicants are in a bit of a trial period right now. With this being a startup school, they are looking to begin school this fall, and their permanent location is at this point yet to be determined. They will begin, if they're approved for this special use permit, will begin evaluating their options immediately and determining whether or not they want to make this their permanent home and move their operations into the principal structure entirely. They've only requested 2 years on the portable classrooms, at which time they are committing to having the portables removed from the property. And I should mention that this request is also a joint request between the property owner, Victory Christian Center, and Redeemer Classical Academy, the proposed tenant. By the end of that 2 years, it is their goal to either, as I mentioned, move into the permanent building on site, or to find another location to move their facilities to. With respect to parking, The site has ample parking for the proposed use. It far exceeds the number of parking spaces that are required. The applicant has submitted a traffic circulation plan for both pickup and drop-off times, which will obviously be the heaviest times of traffic. The city's traffic engineer has reviewed those plans and finds them acceptable for the amount of traffic that will be initially generated. He has indicated, however, that traffic management plan, if the special use permit is approved, will be subject to further review in the future if necessary, should enrollment increase, for example. He also indicated that Redeemer Classical Academy must manage traffic so that there is no staging on either Sulphur Springs Road or Myers Drive during drop-off and pickup times. With regards to the additional standards for institutional group assembly use, the site far exceeds the minimum lot size. No changes are proposed to the existing site lighting, so staff has waived the requirement for a photometric lighting plan. The school has indicated that they plan to use city solid waste carts to handle the solid waste it will generate. No external speakers are proposed for the school, and the school proposes to use the existing grassy area just to the north of the parking lot as its play area. I've got some photographs. Here's the traffic circulation plan. And they will have it enter through Myers Drive and exit the site through Sulphur Springs. And I'll show you some photographs of the site. The principal structure at 1503 Sulphur Springs Road. The existing portable classrooms as viewed from Sulphur Springs Road. Looking south at the portables and the principal structure. Looking south at the parking lot. Looking north at the play area and the existing tree line. As I mentioned, the play area will be the grassy area along the north side of the parking lot, and there's an existing mature tree line along that northern property line. An additional view of the play area and trees. This is the existing tree line along the west side of the property. And looking south towards Myers Drive. And once again, looking south towards Myers Drive. Looking east across Sulphur Springs Road. If the board approves this request, staff recommends the following condition. All portable classroom buildings must be removed from the property no later than July 31st, 2015. If the board has any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them before or after the public hearing. And Mr. Kirk, representing Mr. Swanson, is present, as well as Dr. Hine. And I did receive one email with regards to this request, and want the record to reflect that I received an email from Kristen Zelchko and Savannah Mekic, and I'm passing that out to the board.
There are two different ones? Or just
No, it's the same.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley?
Chairman Rogers, Mr. Ives has actually asked that I read it into the record. And it says, Dear BZA members, please vote in favor to grant a variance to Redeemer Classical Academy and Mr. Swanson for the property located at Sulphur Springs Road. Obviously, as we have chosen this school for our daughter, we would appreciate your support in this matter. Thank you for your consideration. Kristen Zelchko and Savannah Mekic.
I guess when you have a school and a residential zone, parking and traffic is some big ones that the top of the list to look at. It made me wonder, I don't know, at 40 students they're estimating, at what point would a private school be required to have traffic cops there, for lack of a better term, there entering and exiting to kind of help the traffic flow? how we work that, or how they arrive at the plan. And
I don't know if there's a magic number for enrollment, for example. I know that Mr. Balachandra, our traffic engineer, indicated to me that the magic number, if you will, would be around 100 if there was one, in which case it would warrant some additional review. However, as I mentioned, this is something that he will monitor. So if we do get complaints about the traffic and about any impact on the public right of way, it is something that he would review once again.
And I guess starting out, there's not bus service that would serve this.
I don't believe there would be any bus service associated with, and they're shaking their heads no. Well, one thing that I did neglect to mention, I mentioned that the school would only be using for the next 2 years would only be using a portion of the principal structure on the lot. The property owner is still actively looking to lease the remainder of the principal structure. So there would be the possibility that there would be a church, for example, that would use the principal structure simultaneously with the school.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Kirk, Dr. Hine, anything you all would like to add to the application?
I appreciate Mr. Brumley's work. He's been a lot of help and made a clear presentation. I'd just like to say that these buildings are ideally...
State your name for us.
Oh, Dr. Michael Hine.
Thank you.
These buildings are ideally suited for our purposes. There's 9 classrooms, and it's exactly what we're going to need, and there's no way that we plan to be there longer than 2 years because we hope that growth would put us at a point where we'd have to be out of there anyway. So it's definitely a short-term solution for us, but it's a solution we dearly need at this point in time. So.
Right now, I think there's mention of 28 families, and I heard 40 students.
I would say we're probably at 45 right now, and so maybe 30 families.
Okay. In 2 years, do you anticipate that would expand to what?
60 next year, 70 the next, based on. But we're not going to be in those modular buildings 2 more years. We wouldn't fit, and we're not asking for them to be there. We're either going to be in a different location, or we're going to have modified the main church building so that we can move into it.
So to occupy this property, what's the most you anticipate number of students you have?
60. Next, and that would not be this fall, but the next fall.
Okay.
If you gave us 2 years, I mean.
Just to clarify, 60 in the portables.
Right.
But it could be more than that if you moved into the main building. Is that?
Yeah, but I still don't see us being much over 60 next year. But.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Hine?
What is needed to change in the main building for you to occupy that building?
The main building is not built to educational occupancy standards, so the windows in the classrooms are not emergency windows. The doors are not necessarily emergency doors. So and my understanding is also the building isn't completely up to code, and so a substantial amount of work would have to be done inside that building for us to move in there.
Have you calculated how long those improvements would take?
No, well, we've estimated 6 months. Doug's on the building committee.
Hi, good afternoon, Doug Howard. We haven't been able to calculate that yet because we don't know if that's going to be our home. Once we have found out the decision today based on the BZA's decision, we will immediately start looking at what it would take for the permanent structure to be brought up to educational occupancy standards. Then what we'll do after that is start to bring in contractors and try to find out what that price would be and the time frame it would take to get all that work done.
Is it feasible that it could get done in a year?
It's feasible. I'm not sure. The one thing that we don't know is what we don't know. And I don't mean to be facetious on that, but just in case that there's any issues in terms of the structure that we don't know about, if there's any issues that may be of a price tag larger than we would be able to accomplish within that year, it would be very difficult for us to say at this particular point whether or not 1 year would be enough.
Why do you know that 2 years would be enough?
Because we're basically we're asking for the good graces of the BZA for the 2 years. We don't think that we can go anything past the 2 years, so we see that as a definite time limit for us that we have to try to figure out something. If it's not the current site at 1503 Sulphur Springs, then what we need to do is start evaluating other options in terms of another location that may have a building that could be brought up to educational occupancy standards. The second might be finding a piece of land that we could go ahead and start working on, and that's where the 2 years comes in, is that, let's say the worst case scenario would be if we had to find a piece of land that we could get zoned properly and then start to engage an architect and also a contractor to try to bring all that together. It would take 2 years.
And have you researched to know that for sure that would be accomplished within 2 years?
I think that could be accomplished in 2 years. We haven't done a study yet.
You don't know what you don't know there either.
Exactly, right. That's something that will begin tomorrow.
But Doug's a commercial real estate agent. He's got a lot of experience with these kinds of projects, and I think 2 years is very feasible.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, then, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward, state your name and your address and any comments that you might have.
Good afternoon. I'm Keith Barrett, and my address is 2125 Stratford Road. And I am the father of a 10th grader that has been trained through the classical education method, and we are planning on sending him to Redeemer because of that exact thing. He has spent 7 years being trained through the classical method, and the classical method of education is a continuum from 1st grade through 12th grade for it to be entirely effective. So we want him to finish his high school education at Redeemer. And by the way, we have a phenomenal faculty that's going to be teaching at Redeemer, and we are enthusiastic about the direction that we're going. Our school leaders have done an exhaustive search for a location for our students to meet, and the only place that meets all of the requirements, codes and space availability, etc., are these portables that are at the Sulphur Springs address. These portables will provide a stable structural learning environment for our kids, our children, which I hope you will agree is essential for a child's education. So I respectively ask that you approve our request to use the portable buildings at the Sulphur Springs site so that our children will have a place to meet for their classes and that they can continue their education in a stable environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the application? All right. And at this time, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or a motion.
I'm not sure if it's fair for me to be the first one to speak, since I was the only one that voted in favor of the Swansons or Victory Christian Center of Murfreesboro having the ability to continue to have these portables on this site for 2 more years. I think that, strictly my opinion, that knowing who the user will be and knowing that everybody understands the length of time that these portables would be in place is a concrete item. We know when the end date is. I would like to see if we could accommodate not only the owner but the known user in this case. So I am in favor of granting this special use permit.
I was one that last month, given the uncertainty of what was happening with the property, was in favor of taking the opportunity to remove the portables. Now we've got a direction, and as you say, an ending period. I think it would be a good use of the property, and I'm okay going with their application and try to stick with the deadline in 2 years. But that's kind of my feeling.
I have a question. Are we making approval to establish this as group assembly use and also to extend this? And is there any need for us to take this up in 2 motions, or is it just can be done in 1?
It can be done in 1 motion. The use of the portables is a component of the use of the property as a private school. What I've recommended is that as a condition of approval, the portable classroom buildings would be removed from the property no later than 7/31/15, and there wouldn't be a time limit on the use of the property as a private school, but there would be a time limit on the use of the portables that are on the property. So that way, if they decided they wanted to stay on the property and move into the entirely within the principal structure, it would not require reapplication to the board.
And would the use as a church, in addition to the use as an institutional group assembly, there's no need for that future tenant that would be potentially a church to come in as well because that's already been established? Or
That's correct. The church use is already established. Now, I will say if the school use and the church use are coincident, meaning that the demand for parking is there at the same time, it will be something in the future that the existing parking constraints on the site may preclude there from being more than one use on the property. But there are instances now where I believe various public schools do rent out buildings to churches on the weekends. So I think this would be similar in that regard, where the 2 uses are largely not coincident with each other, but having those 2 uses in the same building on the same property at the same time would be something that we would have to review to make sure that there was adequate parking and room for circulation on site at staff level, unless the board required reapplication to the board for some aspect of the site.
Thank you.
Now, the main building couldn't be used for a truck terminal or anything else other than a church, right?
That's correct. The property remains zoned RS-15, and as such, commercial uses that would not normally be allowed in an RS-10 zone would not be permitted.
And nor could, for instance, a moose hall or an Elks Lodge start meeting at that. It has been approved for a group assembly use as a church. Any comparable religious institution could come and use it, but no other outside type group assembly use could be established in there without some additional action from the BZA. And it's somewhat unusual in this in a way because we do frequently want the two issues to be voted on separately, but in this case they're so tied together. It would make very little sense to allow these folks to establish a school in these portable buildings and then demand the buildings be taken away. So we're tying them together this time. We believe that makes the most sense.
Well, I certainly appreciate the desire of these parents and educators to have a school for their children, especially I'm not very knowledgeable of the classical method, but it sounds like a unique thing that's not, there's nothing comparable that you could send your students to other places. But I'm also appreciative of our building codes and our zoning codes and our rules. As an attorney, I'm particularly appreciative of laws because they give me a job. And so when it comes to these things that those people who have been elected and chosen to make these zoning codes have chosen to go by certain rules, it's my job to administer those as a part of the zoning appeals board. And so it's a difficult question for me, as I mentioned earlier, whether or not to even allow this to go forward. I think that it wasn't appropriate to waive this due to those rules. But at the same time, this certainly is, had this been presented earlier, it makes it much more difficult than it was for me last month.
Well, last month when this came before the board, and I remember so well the chairman saying to Mr. Swanson, since you don't have a tenant, great time to remove them since they've been there 15 years. But to me, this is a different case, and, you know, it's a school coming in, and I personally am in favor of it because of that. But last month, he didn't have a tenant, that's what he said, and the chairman said, well, it'd be a great time to move them since nobody's there. So that was the difference.
And I'm comfortable with this application too. I do have a couple concerns, and that is, this is, as a property, is a great church location. It's entirely surrounded by residential property, but it is a school of more than 60 kids. It would be a very questionable location because of the traffic. You've got just a 2-lane road accessing it from either direction, and so while I'm okay with it as it's been presented, I would not, I mean, I hope you all grow, but I would not want to see it grow beyond 60 in this location, 60 students. So while I would ask that there be if there's any motion to approve this application, that in addition to the one staff comment that the portable classrooms be removed no later than July 31st, 2015, that we also stipulate that that there be no more than 60 students enrolled at any time, and also, no, Matthew, you said this was a kind of a given, but that there would be no queuing of vehicles on the street, right?
Yeah, that is a condition of that Mr. Balachandra is requiring as a part of the approval of the traffic management plan. And it's certainly something that can be made a condition of approval of the special use permit as well.
Okay. So those are my concerns.
In your desire to the 60 students, if there's, let's say in the 2 years they decided that the cost, even though there's extensive cost for this building, that they can renovate it to their needs, is that something that their permit would lapse at that point, or we need to look at it again?
I mean, I think we could look at it again, but yeah, that would be my intent, is that this location never grow more than 60 students. And I say that because a church comes in on Sunday with obviously a lot more than 60 people, but hits it Sunday morning and then is out one day, one morning. But this is use that's going to be every day of the week, and you know, if you get more than 60 with that volume of activity in an area that's completely surrounded by residential property, I start to get a little nervous about that.
If their growth hits 65 for next year, we're saying
you got to come back.
We're saying stop.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I would like to see.
I don't have a problem with keeping an eye on it, because it is as you say, your point, so the middle of a residential neighborhood, that part's true. I want to be kind of flexible of, not making me in this position next year if growth does exceed, it's only 15 kids. If they're at 40 or 45 now, I'm okay looking at that.
I think that the hesitation that I have about the 60 is the same that Mr. Young has. I think we can put a guideline there. I do think that the good news with respects to the maximum number of students is that by coming back to the BZA at that point in time, there would be no question in my view that the traffic study would have to be done, and if any improvements need to be made to Myers, if I'm correct, and Sulphur Springs Road, whether it's a turn lane or whatever the case may be, those things would have to be addressed as part of that new application. Because right now we don't have that, but I don't know that we need it based upon 40 students.
Is there a point of information appropriate?
That's okay. We've heard public comments, so we got to go ahead and finish our discussion here and take a vote.
Okay, there was a fact. It's a factual issue.
Okay, tell us what it is. Come up to the podium, please. Right there, that podium right there.
Sulphur Springs Road is a 3-lane road. That's one of the reasons I think it's ideal location. At that part of Sulphur Springs Road, it is 3 lanes.
Yeah, it's got a center turn lane.
Right.
It's not really a driving lane.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
You knew that. Okay.
I drive it every day. That's why I don't want to keep traffic queuing up on Sulphur Springs. All right. Well, if you're all ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion and we'll bat it around. How about that? I'll make a motion that we approve this special use permit, and I will provide. I'm going to say my number is going to be 65 to give you some leeway. That if you give it above that number, that you are going to have to come back before the BZA, and at that time, when you come, you're going to be providing the BZA with that traffic study, so it can be evaluated both by the planning department and Mr. Blumley and his team, because they're going to know a lot more about it than we are, so they can advise us, and the fact that. And this may be hard to monitor, but I would agree with Mr. Rogers in the fact that we don't want any queuing on the street even today. And it's kind of like your comment earlier is you don't know what you don't know. Well, we don't know even with 40 students if we're going to have queuing, and so we need to set that as part of the motion. That we don't want that, and if it happens, then we've got to figure out something needs to be done about it then, and not be part of coming back in the end of 2 years when you're over this 65 number and addressing that issue. That issue would need to be addressed right then. So with that, that's my motion.
Did you include the portables being removed?
Yes, ma'am.
In 2 years.
Yeah, I think yes. And subject to any other staff comments, either written or oral, that have been made before us today.
No second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right. If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That application has been approved. All right. On my agenda. All right. We'll now move on to staff reports and other business.
Chairman Rogers and board members, I have none to report.
All right. And is there any other business from the board? All right, then we're adjourned.